Since the conclusion of World War II, on the 2nd of September 1945, humanity has thankfully been spared the anguish and suffering that would accompany another war fought on a global scale. However, despite the fact that there has never officially been a World War III, humanity has come dangerously close to starting it on several occasions throughout modern history. So join us today as we look at several instances where the frightening possibility of World War III nearly became a reality. To say that the relationship between the United States and the USSR following the Second World War was unstable would be an understatement. Both countries hated and feared their counterparts and would stop at almost nothing to ensure that their nation reigned supreme over the ashes that followed the Second World War. The beginning of the Cold War came down to two factors: the US fearing the spread of communism in the Western world, and the Soviets feeling the US did little to support them when defending their homeland from the German campaigns of World War II. All of this, as well as the fact that the US literally had the power of God in their hands in the form of the nuclear bomb, pushed the nation's relationships to breaking point. Things of course only complicated further when the Soviets developed their own nuclear arsenal, increasing the fear of nuclear war on both sides, as well as the rest of the world. These events eventually led to the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Bay of Pigs, after the US set up nuclear vantage sites in Turkey to warn the Soviets. The Soviets retaliated, however, by setting up their own nuclear vantage point in Cuba to return the favour. As you would expect, tensions only increased. Despite the Cold War lasting from 1947 to 1991, with several scares of all-out war along the way, there was never any actual battles that took place between the US and USSR. However, arguably the closest the two nations came to an actual battle was in Berlin, Germany from 1958 to 1961. The incident, appropriately named the Berlin Crisis, started when the Soviets gave all armed forces within Berlin who were not directly associated with the USSR an ultimatum: lay down your arms and leave Berlin or suffer the consequences. As you can imagine, the Western Allies, mainly the United States, did not take too kindly to this threat and immediately demanded a negotiation with the Soviets. Tensions rose to the point where both sides began to plan military action against one another inside the walls of Berlin. As a result of this action, a large barbed wire fence was resurrected in order to separate the Soviet-ruled Eastern Germany from US-ruled Western Germany. But tensions only increased further, as the two sides began to set up military vantage points on either side of the fence, in the event that an actual battle began. No actual combat between the two nations took place during this period. However, the Berlin Crisis did give birth to one of the most iconic events of the Cold War: the resurrection of the Berlin Wall, forever separating German families from one another from 1961 to 1989. Had the wall not been created to separate the two warring countries, who knows if the tensions would have led to an actual battle. So let's all take a moment to be grateful for the fact that more reasonable heads prevailed during this period, or else the world that you and I see today would look much different, or worse, non-existent. For a more modern perspective on how close humanity has come to World War III, look no further than the USA v North Korea debacle of 2018. Despite the rivalry between the two nations' leaders being reminiscent of a schoolyard filled with childish insults being thrown at one another, the threat of a third world war could have become a possibility. The rivalry between the two nations really started back in the 1950s during the Korean War, where the US backed North Korean rival South Korea during the war, once again due to the threat of communism spreading into the Western world. Fast forward to 2016, and Donald Trump is elected President of the United States. Meanwhile, North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un continues his fascination with nuclear weapons and parades his military arsenal for the world to see. Trump was not very impressed with North Korea's missile testings in 2017, and began to publicly state his dissatisfaction with Kim Jong-un. What then ensued was a back and forth argument that consisted of the two leaders throwing insults at one another.
And we can't have madmen out there shooting rockets all over the place. And by the way, Rocket Man should have been handled a long time ago. Little Rocket Man.
Kim Jong-un saying he takes President Trump's threats personally, vowing to make President Trump, quote, pay dearly, calling him a mentally deranged dotard or senile old man.
One slip up or word too far from either of these leaders could have led to a declaration of war. But luckily, both leaders seemed as mature as one another. Not too sure if that's a compliment. These political squabbles eventually led to a peace summit that was held in Singapore in 2018. Kim displayed eagerness to meet Trump and eventually got his wish on the 12th of June. The two leaders met, shook hands, and spoke. Peace then ensued. Did World War III really seem like a possibility? Unlikely. But had either one of these nations decided to launch a nuclear attack in response to something stupid that was said by the opposing leader, all-out war would have ensued. In other words, World War III literally could have been started by a tweet. I will leave you with one final instance where the world came dangerously close to starting World War III. This incident did indeed occur during the Cold War. However, I believe it is the single closest event in human history where World War III nearly started. The year was 1983. By this time of the Cold War, it was common for US aircraft to fly dangerously close to Soviet airspaces and trigger their early warning devices. After this would happen, the US aircraft would turn back at the last moment as a way of keeping the Soviets on edge. But on the 26th of September 1983, a Soviet aircraft command center just outside of Moscow was alerted by a specific alarm. This alarm suggested a nuclear missile had been fired by the US and was heading for the Russian capital. It was also common practice at the time to fire an immediate counterattack at an enemy whenever the threat of a nuclear missile was launched. The man who was in charge of the airspace at the time, Stanislav Petrov, decided not to fire back, despite all his comrades believing that a missile was in fact heading for the Soviet Union. Petrov went against his training, because he reasoned that if the US really wanted to attack them, they would fire hundreds of missiles, not just one. He could not confirm this, however, and had to wait and see whether his gamble would pay off. His suspicions turned out to be correct, as no nuclear missiles found their way to Moscow that day. A subsequent investigation into the events found that sun rays shining off of high-rise clouds was the cause of the alarm triggers. So in other words, if not for one Soviet commander, World War III and potentially even the extinction of our species may have ironically been caused by something that provides us with life in the first place. The sun. As you have just heard, there have been several instances where the possibility of World War III came dangerously close to becoming a reality. Who knows what the world would look like today if any of these events had led to global war? Well, as Albert Einstein famously said in the quote displayed at the start of this video, "I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." What do you think of this list? Did we miss something? Let us know in the comments section below. Thanks for watching.